Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the N64 magazine Time Capsule. As always, this is the show where we take a nostalgic look back at N64 magazine in chronological order to take ourselves back to the glory days of print media. For those new to the series, just a reminder that if you're watching in full HD and on a large enough screen, you can pause a video anytime and you should be able to clearly read the text on all of the pages. In this episode, we will be taking a look back at issue 11 of N64 magazine, which is the January 1998 edition, and is personally one of my most memorable and favourite issues of the magazine. Not only did the Link cover art send this flying off store shelves, but it also contained a look at what would be some of the 1998's most hottest games. Just look at the back cover to the left hand side and look at the list of featured games and you'll know that you're in for a solid issue. Jonathan Davies writes the intro letter to the reader and he builds on his anticipation for just how good 1998 was looking for the N64. Sadly though, he mentions that the N64 DD looks interesting, but what had been shown so far leaves him with a little unsure feeling as to what to make of it. As always, a random story is thrown into the mix, and this month we find out that he had been accidentally standing on caterpillars in his kitchen, which had developed into an infestation. The back page to the left has a quite frankly bizarre advert for Diddy Kong Racing, and I think they would have been much better suited to putting something, well, which is a bit more of a reflection of the actual game itself. The contents page, as expected, lists where you can find everything contained in this issue. I remember to this day the excitement I had instantly flipping to the latest Zelda section, and I wasn't disappointed in this issue. We also find out that this issue contains an interview with Miyamoto, which is always interesting, getting an insight into the man, the myth and the legend himself. From SpaceWorld 97 comes more information surrounding Banjo Kazooie. The magazine states that while Zelda stole the show for many, they themselves found that Banjo Kazooie was one of the most impressive games on show. They refer to the main hub of the game as a main hall, where you access the main levels from. I'll be really interested to find out exactly when the term main hub was first adopted by the mass media, but quite oddly, they state that they hadn't seen a game with as much atmosphere as this since Turok Dinosaur Hunter. After packing the pages with some quite honestly gorgeous screenshots, they gave an overview of the screen overlay and explained some of the worlds they had got to play of the 4 available for this show version. Quite honestly, just seeing them drool over this game sent my excitement for this title through the roof, and it just instantly gave it the nod that this was going to be another classic rare title. Now next up is what almost every N64 owner had been waiting for more of. More news from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And most importantly, some glimpses of how the game actually plays. It's quite interesting to see that already there are some changes from this version to the final game. They state that pressing the R button at any time will switch the game into a top-down perspective, and also in the lower right photo it's explained that carrying the staff prevents Link from running due to its weight. Over on the next page, these oddities really do continue. The magazine then contradicts itself, saying that the R button is used to crouch, and also that Miyamoto had told them that Link can also throw items, which included hammers. The magazine tells us that they were kicked off the demo kiosk before seeing how the day-night cycle worked, and also that this version only had an adult Link as playable character. I remember spending countless hours churning over these pages, looking for small details in the screenshots and trying to get an idea for exactly what secrets I may be able to unearth. 1080 Snowboarding is shown next in the first photos of the game. What surprised the magazine the most was that not only were Nintendo doing an extreme sports title, a realistic style game, but apparently they were told it was already 80% complete and was going to be released imminently to coincide with the Winter Games. I remember seeing cool borders and steep slope sliders on TV shows like Games World all the time, and so when I first saw these screenshots I couldn't wait to be able to finally play it. Sending my excitement even further and through the roof was the team's first hands-on experience with F-Zero X. After many months of seeing screenshot after screenshot, I really wanted to know how it played. Let's be honest, even Nintendo themselves said that they were sacrificing graphics to make the game insanely quick, and so from the screenshots I had seen already, I was interested but not sold on it. The team states that the game is blisteringly quick, and the game had retained the same toughness of the Super Nintendo title. In fact, they confirmed that the game was around 60% finished, but expected much more work to be done on the AI to make the game a little more balanced in the difficulty department. Planet 64 is the news section, and this month it's packed full of interesting tales. After explaining how SpaceWorld went down, they then spoke about the N64 DD. They explained that Nintendo had shifted their intention for the device. They were now seeing it as a beyond gaming device, and as such were showing off the creator suite of titles at SpaceWorld. They were also keen to speak about the connectivity and explain that Pocket Monster Stadium would use the N64 DD in the same way that the controller pack would eventually allow the game to transfer info from your Game Boy carts. More interestingly for me was the funny news at the top of the page around the North American Diddy Kong Racing launch. In an utter blunder, the game was released to retail stores around 3 weeks before the game's official release, meaning sales had been impacted by people renting the title instead of buying it. Not only that, but some shady store owners were selling copies of the game under the counter ahead of the game's official release. The next page has the usual roundup of newly available N64 accessories, and this month there seems to be a glut of good and bad storage solutions. The Fanzine farm also showcases 3 fanzines, and I always love the fact that this big publication took time and space to help and allow aspiring writers to have their work featured. At the top of the page we learn that Buck Bumble has a publisher, and also a new video game show is looking for 100 contestants to battle out on TV. Fellow YouTuber Guru Larry was actually a contestant on this show when it went into production, and you can find the hilarity that ensued over on his channel. I'll put a link in the description down below for those who aren't already subscribed to this legendary YouTuber. A whole host of racing games feature in this month's Planet 64 Coming Soon section. You probably all know that I loved Cruis'n as a series, and these screenshots of the sequel set me up all ready for the game's release. More interestingly though is the news that Nintendo's own Buggie Boogie is going through a huge overhaul in a similar way to Body Harvest. The game has been changed from a military style game to one featuring cartoon-like buggies. Now they advise that they have been and seen no further screenshots of this, so they're already expecting there to have doubts about whether or not this game will be progressing and eventually released. To the right hand side there is more news on the release of Rev Limit, and by this point I think many of us were getting annoyed at the delays and were wishing they would just hurry up and release this damn game. There is also another unreleased N64 title called Power Slide, which was to be a conversion of the arcade racer, but there are no N64 screenshots, just stills from the arcade version. Taking a break from racing games, there's also new photos of NHL Breakaway and also Acclaim Sports Soccer. Apparently Acclaim Sports Soccer had been completely scrapped and fully restarted after the studio saw just how good ISS was, and so the magazine explains that the screenshots shown here were likely to now be completely different to what will eventually be released. An ear to the ground gives rumblings of rumours that they have heard, and also reports that Diddy Kong Racing had received some poor reviews in Japan, some going as low as 6 out of 10, which I find shocking, although naturally the Japanese were more in love with Mario Kart 64. Fusoya is back with RPG Corner, and after promise and more promises that Mother 3 would be shown at SpaceWorld, they got nothing. No footage, information or screenshots to show off. Now this is despite the developer saying there was no reason earlier on in the year why the game would not be shown at the event, and even Miyamoto himself said that the scenario and game engine were all fully complete. Another surprise showing at SpaceWorld was Super Mario RPG 2, and although it was not in video or playable form, the screenshots themselves sent the magazine in overdrive with excitement for further information around this surprise announcement. Reading through the ultra release list was always a tease. So many unconfirmed release dates, titles which would miss estimated shipment dates, and more importantly, titles which are in early stages of development. Just look at this list and see how many weird and wonderful game titles were included to realise just how many titles were in production for the console, which were either canned or changed course completely. Max Everingham, as our Englishman in Tokyo, gives more information about life in Japan and the N64 scene there in general. Backing up the previously mentioned Diddy Kong Racing reviews in Japan, he mentions how he's watched Japanese gamers play the game for a few moments on demo kiosks in stores and then walk away from the game completely indifferent. From For what I deem to be such a classic title, it's always interesting to see how different games appeal to different audiences. He also talks about the throwaway culture of Japanese electronics and gives you some handy phrases to learn in Japanese around this issue. N64 Arena is up next, and this month there's a glut of reviews, including Aero Fighters Assault going up against Wild Choppers. There's also WCW vs NWO World Tour, 64 Sumo, and many more, including the horrific MK Mythologies. Most importantly though, and kicking off the review section, is San Francisco Rush. Now you'll either love this or hate it, but the review is almost like a mini guide to boot. The pages break down the tracks and locations of the secret keys before finally moving on to the actual written review. The magazine states that one North American magazine had stated that this game is now the third best N64 title available. Now I agree that this is far from the truth in most gamers' opinions, but the game is nevertheless quite fun to play. They mention that they could overlook the game's general flaws, including the draw distance and mechanics, because racing in it is just so damn fun. I'm of the opinion that there are many N64 titles just like this, where it is possible to overlook the minor issues. They give it a respectable score, but absolutely slaughter the game's audio, which I feel is somewhat harsh. Aero Fighters Assault vs Wild Chopper is an odd pairing for games to pit up against one another. However, I guess both of them being flight-based titles, they saw it as a straightforward link. Like the previous review, the first pages are covering off missions and the craft available, and giving little information away as to what you'll be doing in the core game. They mention that both games have flaws, and most noticeably Aero Fighters Assault is a letdown from one of the most promising studios on the console. They mention that it never seems to pick up the pace, and instead is left with uninspired missions. On the other hand, they praise the more arcade-like experience in Wild Choppers, but likewise state that it has many gameplay flaws which bring down the overall experience. Both titles receive less than positive reviews, with Wild Choppers getting a more favourable review. I would personally agree, as this review, well, it really reflects my own opinions. In a surprise review which I never saw coming, 64 Sumo gets a huge amount of praise, and Max Everingham mentions just why he loved the title so much. Now I've previously reviewed this game in an episode of the N64 Japanese Eye series, and for a Japanese exclusive N64 title, I personally really enjoyed it, and also found that whilst the language barrier limits the storyline, the gameplay is quite enjoyable. A high score of 90% pits this in the star game category, but I think many Western gamers would disagree with such a high score being slapped on this title. Wheel of Fortune is to the right, and the less that is said about that game the better, so moving swiftly on. Now calm yourselves, fight fans. They gave WCW vs NWO World Tour 70%. Take a deep breath and then read the review. I know, like many of you reading this and watching this video, this is a game which I have amazing memories of, and so seeing this get just 70% was shocking. Tim Weaver is definitely the wrong person to be reviewing this title. Sorry to say that, Tim. They liken the game to WCW vs the World on PlayStation, and we all know that the game's grappling engine is completely different, and this is a vastly superior title despite it being classed as a spiritual successor. Tim Weaver doesn't seem to get wrestling, and mocks the wrestlers, their names and attire, and any grapple fan would be seething at him for this. Next up is Famista 64, which gets a mediocre review because, let's face it, it's a Japanese style baseball game and it was never really going to be setting the world alight. But your eyes no doubt are instantly drawn to the hilarious Mortal Kombat Mythologies review to the right. Instead of reviewing the game, Jonathan Davies states facts about the games, explaining just why it is so terrible. In a rare move, he also confirms that he didn't complete the game after getting so frustrated with it by the second level. Scoring it just 9% out of 100% made this one of the lowest all-time scoring games released on the console, and he simply states that he would rather get impaled or have to play Wheel of Fortune than put any more time into this game. The magazine now breaks for some advertising, which is exactly what we shall do. So join us after the break, where we will continue with the second half of the magazine, which includes interviews and guides, including how to become a Diddy Kong Racing Master. The featured article this month is a game-by-game overview of what SpaceWorld 97 had on offer. They give an overview of the event, including the huge turnout of over 250,000 people. the keynote speeches, and most importantly, their scores out of 5 for just how much they are now anticipating the games that were shown. It's no surprise that a now complete version of Yoshi's Story is up at the top of their list, but it's also worth noting that they were also impressed with what would be released in the West as Hey You Pikachu, and they noted that they loved the additional peripheral, adding a new gameplay dimension. Not so lucky though were Rev Limit and Aero Gauge, which were pretty much panned and slated beyond salvageable levels. They also mentioned Fire Electric Pen drawing huge crowds to the kiosks, no doubt due to it being a tie-in with the popular Japanese television series of the time. Also of note is quite surprisingly that SimCity 2000 didn't get a high rating from them, as this type of game was unique for the console at the time. Likewise, the magazine loved the voice recognition unit of Hey You Pikachu, but didn't seem as excited with the N64 biosensor for Bio Tetris. A glut of fighting games are up next, and sadly none of them failed to set the team's expectations to a high level. Dual Heroes, Flying Dragon, G.A.S.P and Super Robot Spirits all received mixed previews, and the team felt that the N64 was still significantly behind the PlayStation when it came to this game genre. In the bottom right hand corner, you'll also see Snowboard Kids, or Snowboard Kids as it would be known here in the West. It's funny because they gave it 2 out of 5 for anticipation, but this game would eventually go on to be one of the most nostalgic and beloved N64 titles for many people. In a funny side note, the Snowspeeder booth host working for Imagineer confided to the N64 magazine staff that this 70% complete status of the game is an out and out lie, and it's nowhere near complete. The magazine seemed to agree and noted that the game seemed in a very early beta status. Jungle Emperor Leo I think got some high feedback simply due to it being Miyamoto's pet project. With no gameplay on offer, they were left with some basic details of the game and some screenshots explaining a little bit more about it. As we know, this game was never released, so it's an interesting insight into the mind of Miyamoto. The next article is all around the latest on the N64 DD coming off the back of SpaceWorld. They mention that a lot has changed with Nintendo's intentions for the device since it was first announced as an alternative way to play games on the console. After the PlayStation had snapped up gamers looking for a more serious type of game in Japan, and when combined with Pokemon becoming the best-selling game in the history of Japan, Nintendo has had a rethink. The device was now to become a way of expanding existing games and also allowing more flexibility between Game Boy games and the N64. They were going to design a range of sweet software packages to appeal to both sexes and their newfound younger audience. They also gave an overview of the 3 Maker games shown at SpaceWorld, but even back in the day as a younger man, I felt really unimpressed, and I was more interested in what it would do to my games that I was currently looking forward to, rather than how it would impact on my creativity. Still, news that an F-Zero X expansion kit would be made was just about enough to keep me excited for it. The 2 top dogs of Nintendo answered questions about the current state of the N64 and its future, and in a rare insight they admit that the console had stalled in certain areas when up against competition. They combined this with an overview of the keynote speeches, and it was becoming quickly apparent that Nintendo were aligning the company in a slightly different direction. They focused on new gameplay experiences rather than new games. They wanted to make unique ways to play titles and interact with them, rather than offering an endless supply of traditional style games. Even the magazine themselves suggests some concerns with this, but it uses F-Zero's expansion pack as an excellent example as a way in which this problem may actually benefit gamers in the future. Miyamoto also explains that choosing CDs would have been a mistake for the console, as the rewritable format of the N64 DD carts means that they can now offer something which no other games console can. Well, I guess we'll have to take your word on that, Miyamoto. This month's how-to guide is a funny article around infiltrating a Japanese game show. They detail everything from getting around, gaining news scoops, and even show etiquette. For someone that's visited Japan, it's common knowledge now, but as a child I remember thinking of Japan as this mythical robot-filled land, and so the words on these pages were gripping stuff for me at the time. It's also nice to see that they mention Akihabara as being a must-visit place for game collectors. From past experience I'd certainly agree even to this day. The second how-to guide is one of my all-time favourite games, Diddy Kong Racing. This section was invaluable for me when playing the game for the first time, and instead of taking away from the fun, I actually found it helped me to gain more enjoyment from the game, especially when trying to take down Whiz-Pig in the second boss battle. For many of you now though, you'll be well experienced in this title, so you may not actually gain much from this. Although saying that, from my recent live stream of the entire adventure mode recently, there are still secrets that some of you were not aware of, so this may be worth you checking out. The third how-to guide is for mischief makers, and coming from Treasure, you know this is a game which is easy to pick up, hard to master, and has a gameplay mechanic which is unique, and therefore any help is often appreciated. Thankfully though, they refrain from ruining some of the game's surprises, despite really giving some strong clues as to how to get the game's story endings. It's a shame that Treasure didn't end up releasing their other 2 N64 titles in the West, but with Mischief Makers being a fan favourite, I've no doubt you've already searched and played their other N64 games. The fourth and final how-to guide in this packed edition of the N64 magazine is for Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey. Being an arcade style affair, the game is not really a technical masterclass, but this guide offers something for casual fans, or really for anybody wanting to get slightly better at the game, or if you're not used to playing hockey games, this could come in useful. Just don't expect you to become a master at this game. Tips Extra this month has some help with Extreme G, GoldenEye and some readers' top 10 tips. Most of these involve glitches, which most gamers will not really be that interested with, but some of the other readers' tips are a form of a spectacle rather than something that's going to make you better at the games. And this trend continued in the Nintendo hotline, where the magazine had been taking a lot of calls from gamers asking for help with GoldenEye, and so they duly obliged and put everything down in writing for the most common calls and questions that they had received. I'm the Best has the most up-to-date set of readers' proven scores and times for various games, and I used to get a lot of fun back in the day trying to beat these. It was a great way to extend the life of a game, and there was nothing more annoying than beating someone's high score published in the magazine and then finding it had been beaten by a brand new score in the very next issue. Club 64, as always, is one of my favourite sections with tons of readers' letters to laugh at. One fan has written in with his personal webpage from Spain. Yes, I did check the link and it is no longer active. There is also an irate fan who purchased a load of new games for full RRP to then find another store selling them at a more realistic price for the time. Dream On has fans N64 Dream games, and most notably someone is after Predator 64. Although worryingly, they say that this would be including the Danny Glover sequel. Saying that though, I really like the isometric Predator game on the Genesis based on Predator 2, so hey, it could have worked. Another reader writes in about how crap a lot of the N64 memory cards are and them failing pretty frequently, to be honest. The magazine states that they did an investigation into this, but aside from one memory card by Spook, the rest of the memory cards they tested all worked perfectly with the spotlight on them. We all know that some third-party memory packs were awful, and so perhaps the magazine brushed over this letter to avoid really annoying their advertisers who are helping to fund and keep the magazine alive. If you're interested in subscribing to N64 magazine, you're sadly too late to get your hands on a free and terrible third-party controller as a sign-on bonus. But if you want to see more episodes of N64 magazine and this channel, then make sure you're subscribed. And yes, that was a really cheap shameless plug. The directory, as always, brings you snippet game reviews and scores for all N64 titles released so far. Each month this became an important feature for me when considering which games to pick up, and it's all nicely wrapped up into a concise and easy to read form. And so sadly that brings us to the end of yet another N64 magazine time capsule episode. Next month the magazine is going for cold, and there will be a big winter sports theme, as you can guess. Sadly though, it's Nagano Winter Olympics, which you all know is being quite awful. Nevertheless though, again thank you for watching, and let me know which your favourite part of this magazine and issue was. You can do that in the comment section down below, and until next time.